Welcome to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast with Darren Mitchell. If you're a sales leader looking to take your leadership to a whole new level, then this is the podcast for you. We'll be exploring tips, techniques, and strategies to help you take your leadership to the exceptional level and allow you to enjoy more money, more meaning, and better sales results. Welcome back to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast, and a very special welcome to a man who said he doesn't have a superhero name, but I think his name isn't in itself a superhero name. Coming in from Los Angeles, he's a seasoned AI and machine learning specialist, and he's been, get this, he's been in the industry working around AI for over 40 years. Principal of, now hopefully I pronounce this correctly, principal at Arvoinen Consulting. How did I go there?
Right.
Got
Yep,
it?
that's it.
Excellent.
Yep.
Mr. Arshavir Blackwell, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
It's we were just talking before we pressed record, and you were telling me about how it's a heat wave and how things are unseasonably hot in LA at the moment.
Yes, we're very fortunate. We usually when this happens have fires. And so I mean, knock on wood, right? But so far that has not happened. So I'm praying that continues to be the case. It's cooling down now, so it's not as bad as it was before, but it's been pretty brutal.
Well, hopefully there's nothing, because I was actually in Las Vegas. When was it? December 2024. And the
Yeah.
following January, that's where the LA fires, California fires happened, which was
Yeah.
devastating. So you don't wish that upon anybody.
No. And
No.
that came very close to me. In fact, people in my building actually evacuated because it was that close.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is
It was
that is not
lived
good.
near Sunset Boulevard, and it was actually happening about a mile or so, maybe like 2 kilometers from where I live. You could see it from my window. I
That
looked
is
out the window and I started yelling to my neighbors, "Hey, you guys, look out the window. It's not looking good."
Yeah, it's not a pleasant place to be in those sort of situations. So
No,
but
very scary.
thankfully you're okay, and
Everything is fine now. Yep, doing
good.
doing great.
Excellent. Hey, look, as I said before, looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah,
You've
too.
been in the industry a long, long time working with AI. In
Yeah,
fact, you were just telling me that you're doing AI courses back in the day in college. So
yeah.
I always like Arshavir to go into people's backgrounds just to get a bit of a sense of
Sure,
context
sure. Right.
of where you started, and what was it that led you down this path. And I should also mention you're a PhD, so you're a doctor. So should I
Yeah.
have referred to you as doctor?
I doesn't the problem with being called doctor is then, obviously if there's a medical emergency, people think that you're able to do something for them. So it's probably just as well that you don't.
So you don't put doctor on your airline ticket.
Exactly. My uncle was a PhD and that happened to him for real. So
Was that
I
right?
mhm. He was a chemist and yeah, they thought when he said doctor that someone passed out. Oh, quick, get him. And he was like, well, I'm a chemist, actually. I can't really help you. Sorry.
So do some CPR. So
Yeah.
where did it start for you, Arshavir? So where did it start? And I'd love to understand what was the intrigue around AI that's led you down this path of what you do today, working with organizations and helping particular big organizations. We'll talk about your voicecraft .ai certainly as well. But where did it all start, and what was it that was the trigger for you?
Well, I was always the kid that was really into Star Trek and really into androids and all the computers on Star Trek that, were always causing havoc. And then when I went to college, I just ended up taking a lot of courses in both computer science and AI, which is kind of a sub-discipline of computer science, and then
Mm,
also cognitive science, which is a sort of parallel discipline to AI. It kind of studies a lot of the same problems, but from the perspective more of how human beings process information.
yeah.
And then I went to grad school at UC San Diego, which was very exciting. I was really fortunate to work with two of the top names in the field of what we call then, which no one really calls it anymore, neural networks. And Jeff Ellman, who was the creator of the Ellman Network, was I had two advisors. And the other advisor was Elizabeth Bates, who was a psycholinguist who did really, really interesting work in how neural networks could actually explain human language processing. So that's kind of where I got my start. And I'm always amazed at how smart those two were.
Yeah.
Because, 35 years ago now, they were talking and predicting about a lot of the stuff that we're seeing just in the past couple of years that most people were very, very skeptical of at the time.
Mm,
Um, and it's kind of hard to imagine, but AI has gotten so big now, in particular, neural networks and transformers and large language models, that it's hard to recall that it wasn't that long ago that people thought that that was not the correct approach to solving a lot of these problems.
mm,
And they just always kind of resonated with me. And there was a kind of a long winter, I think we were talking about this before, where
mm.
this particular approach was kind of seen as being on the outside. But now, the fact is that these models really demonstrate some amazing behavior. And I think that's the thing that's kind of proved it to people.
I'm always intrigued because you think about people that you just mentioned there, and they would have been pioneers of their generation and
Yes.
big visionaries. What was it about what they could see? Was it something that they just had a completely different perspective, or they were just a much bigger thinker, or was it something else that the rest of us weren't able to see? And I mean, it just staggers me that people can have these big visions and see things that others can't, and they
Yeah.
almost become the outliers. And I'm wondering
Yeah.
how many people were looking at them in a slightly derogatory way to say, "You guys are delusional."
Yeah. Well, that's actually an excellent explanation of what they encountered because at the time in the 80s and the 90s, the approach to human information processing was much more mechanistic, much more kind of like a traditional computer, which takes, code and symbols and does stuff with the symbols.
Mm,
And the main proponent of that approach in language was, of course, Noam Chomsky. And he had this very, very strong symbolic approach to language and language processing and just linguistics in general. He still does. He's still alive.
mm.
And the thing, yeah, he's I think in his 90s.
Wow.
Uh, but yeah, but the thing is that they were seen as kind of the loyal opposition.
Okay.
So I remember going to a conference that they had sponsored once, and one of the people at the conference said, the only thing I think you guys have in common is that you all dislike Noam Chomsky's work. And so there was this kind of they were kind of the bad boys of cognitive science, right? They were kind of the outsiders, the kids, standing in front of the drugstore smoking cigarettes. Uh, but it turned out that in many of the ways that really count, and many of the ways that are really fundamental, they were somehow right. I think I would attribute, to answer your question about why, I
Yeah.
think I would attribute a lot of that to the fact that they were not dogmatic in believing a certain sort of philosophical take on these problems. In other words, they were willing to look at the actual data that they were seeing in experiments with human beings, and they were willing to say, you know what, these data don't support what people like Noam Chomsky are telling us about how human language processing actually works.
Hmm.
And there are other people that were looking at the data that couldn't make that leap. It was what I think Arthur C. Clarke calls it a failure of imagination, which means you have all the facts in hand, but you just can't make the leap to actually believing what's staring you right in the face. And I think
Mm,
the big thing for them was they were so smart. They could say, well, this is not the conventional wisdom. This is not what we were taught in school, but the data are telling us that this is what language processing really looks like. And,
mm.
we kind of have to go with that. And it turned out that they were right. So,
Wow. And
yeah,
ahead of their time and now being proven right. And hopefully
exactly.
they're getting the recognition they deserve. But do you think back then that having a vision and being the outlier and looking at the data, was it a case of we had to wait until, I guess, technology networks, power supplies, all the stuff that now supports
Yeah.
large language models caught up in terms of being able to support it from an infrastructure point of view. That because I'd love to ask you what do you think has been behind? It's almost like this exponential uptake or curve around AI, and it seems for
Yeah.
most people that AI is a new concept, but as we know, it's been
Yeah.
around for a long, long time.
No, it's been around since, I mean, arguably the 70s. You could argue that it's been around as long as computers have been around. I mean, if you look at any kind of project that tries to use computers to do something that human beings do, like visual recognition, detecting targets in an array, understanding language, translation. I mean, you could argue all of those are AI, and those are all things that have been done, or tried to be done for many,
Mm,
many years. So the question is, what has changed? And I think, first of all, obviously, these new models take huge amounts of compute in
yeah.
order to succeed. I mean, we are talking about having to use 10,000, 20,000, huge arrays of GPUs, of very powerful GPUs. And they take months to process the information necessary to create these models, to train the
Mm,
models, is what we call it. And that costs now, millions of dollars. And at the time, even the most advanced supercomputer like a Cray or something like that back in the 70s couldn't do
mm,
anything near what we're seeing now. So the compute is certainly a big factor
mm,
in what we're seeing. But at the same time, I think there were a lot of, so although the sort of proto neural network theory, I think, had a lot right with it, there was still a lot of problems that couldn't really be solved, both because the compute wasn't there, but also because we didn't really have the theory to tell us just what kind of algorithm we needed to
mm,
use in these systems in order to get the right result. And we
yeah.
had, I can name off thousands of different kinds of approaches that were tried and they kind of worked, but they didn't work great. And then there was a paper, which I don't know if you're familiar with it, is 2017 called Attention is All You Need. And that was really the point at which the field began to turn around because
Okay.
that's where the current LLM architecture was first described in an academic paper and in a theoretical sense. And that paper, Attention is All You Need, is kind of what everything that's come after has all been really a consequence of the work done there and all of the other work around it. I mean, obviously, they weren't working in a vacuum.
Mm,
And once they kind of cracked the code, so to speak, of how to use so these are now like not just one layer of information processing. These are like a super, super tall layered cake, 28 layers, 38 layers, 40, 50 layers of information processing unit. So something comes in at the start and words come in and then they go to one layer and then they go to the next layer and then they go to the next and the next and the next and the next and the next. And the problem with that is, well, how do you actually get them to do what it is they're supposed to do? So,
mm,
and what's particularly weird about this, which I think a lot of people may not be aware of, is we don't actually understand how these work. So, and that may be surprising to people because, well, how can you have a system that does all this amazing stuff, but you don't understand how it works? And it's because they've kind of set all of these procedures up to run automatically
yeah.
and then when they run, they give a proper result. But what's going in all those little cake layers in between is something that is still, we're just at the beginnings, really, of understanding how it goes from all this raw input to being able to make essentially reasoned choices and
Mm,
intelligent, responses to your questions
yeah.
and things that seem like there's actually, some kind of a presence behind what's answering your questions. And that's actually another area that I'm very, very interested in is it's called mechanistic interpretability, and it's just a fancy word really for trying to figure out what's going on in all those layers. And so I spend, quite a bit of time on that as well.
Man, it's as you were talking, I'm thinking, okay, so human beings have designed this. They've designed
Yes.
the CPUs, they've designed the architecture, they've put it all
Yes.
together, and then we're saying, we've designed it, we've constructed it, but we don't know how it
We
works.
don't understand, we understand in some very general ways, and we understand if we change this input or this parameter, then this is more likely to happen. But in terms of the real, it's not like a car where you're like, okay, there's pistons and there's all these little things
Yeah,
going on inside the car, and we can understand exactly how it is that you put gasoline in and you get propulsion. And what even makes it, I'll say, I don't want to, it makes it a little scarier. And I don't want to, I don't like to use that word because there's so many people that are already very afraid of AI. But what makes it a little more daunting or a little more nerve-wracking is that now the systems that we're using are being designed by other AI systems. And that's where it really gets crazy because you have a system that's been designed not by a human committee
mm,
but by a committee of AI agents, basically. And understanding how that works becomes even more opaque. And I mean, in my own work, very few people do the actual hand coding that we used to think of as being sort of the bread and butter of what
yeah,
software developers do. Almost all of it now is done through the intermediary of artificial intelligence agents.
yeah,
So people are basically telling these agents to write code to do X, Y, or Z, and then kind of iterating until it's exactly what they want. But they're not touching the actual source code for them. I mean, some of them are, of course, but
mm,
it's much less frequent for them to actually look at the inner guts of the code that they're working on. So even at that level, we're now writing code, not just AI code, but AI is writing code for other things that we don't necessarily understand completely how it's solving those problems as well.
yeah,
So it's something that's inevitable because the problems these are solving are so important and we need solutions to them.
yeah,
Uh, but it is a little crazy that we have these machines out there doing things that we really don't understand how they work under the hood.
yeah. But if you think about it, there'll be like describing a car. Like for me, for example, driving a car, and I've still got a what is it called? Petrol engine. I was gonna
Yeah.
there's a acronym for it, but you ask me anything about the car,
Oh,
I have the
yeah,
key.
internal combustion, right.
Yep, turn internal combustion. That's it. Turn the engine on. Put it into to drive, and off you go. I wouldn't know the first thing about it.
No, you and I don't. I mean, it's complete mystery to me as well. But there are people out there who get how it
Yeah,
works, is my
yeah,
point. And
yeah.
there's no one really out there that gets how these systems work. And that's, I think, the big difference.
So that sort of begs the question because there are lots of people out there that are saying, "Oh, it's whether they call them conspiracy theorists or
Yeah,
doomsdayers and whatever." I guess the ethical question then comes around all of these large language model systems about what sort of guardrails do we put in place so that if we're
yeah,
giving the machines, I guess, the instructions, and therefore we don't know how it's actually developing a
right.
platform or a solution, can they start to do things that perhaps go against, for want of a macro term, humanity? So
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on that?
Well, that is certainly a possibility. Now, I've thought about this a while in terms of something really catastrophic. I've never quite been able to figure out what exactly one of these things could do that would be so catastrophic that it would, bring the world to an end. But
Yeah.
it's definitely the case that they can do things that you don't want them to do that can harm people. So they can give you
Mm,
bad medical advice. A lot of people, I rely on it for medical advice. I give it all of my test results and all of my doctor's visits and everything. And I rely very heavily on it interpreting that stuff because I don't understand any of it.
mm,
So that's just one area where people are coming to rely upon it very heavily now. And it would be critical,
mm,
very, very bad if the guardrails broke down and it started giving poor advice. And there are a lot of places where I don't think it's an existential threat to humanity, at least not yet. But there are definitely a lot of places where you can see examples of it giving false information, giving incorrect information. Sycophancy is a big problem.
yeah.
A lot of people talk about, well, these models just kind of tell you what you want to hear, and how useful is that really?
Mm,
And there are ways to work around that. I mean, I do this all the time. I say, don't be a sycophant. Tell me what you really think. And it actually works. It'll say, okay, maybe I was over exaggerating a little bit. It's a good idea, but here are the problems with it.
Hmm.
So that's actually not something that I'm particularly worried about as a problem. I think it's part of that issue is education,
Yeah.
is making sure that the people who are using these, are have the right understanding of what they can and can't do, but also how to interact with them. I feel like we're kind of back in the early days of GPS, where someone's GPS would tell them to turn right and they would drive into a lake or something. And it's kind of like, use your common sense. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a computer. It can make mistakes. So if it tells you to turn left and there's a lake there, maybe don't, turn left. And I think that there's a little bit of that quality of with these systems. The other thing that we want to do, though, is this is why understanding how these systems' mechanistic interpretability is so important. Because when things go wrong, it's not enough to just say, well, we put in this input and we got out this output and it was incorrect and we don't know why. That's just
Mm.
not a very satisfying answer. So by looking into how the system is actually doing some of this stuff, and that's the thing that, I'm working on and many other people are working on as well.
Yeah.
And it's a very difficult problem to solve. That I think is going to help to ameliorate a lot of the concerns that you're talking about with it, kind of going crazy and doing stuff that we don't want it to do.
Yeah, it's interesting because you hear a lot of catastrophizing in the world about, and
Yeah.
maybe it's people who have ulterior motives and so forth. But
Yeah.
the fact is, with progress, with industrialization, with the information age, you can't stop it. And if you
No,
try to stop it, you'll just be run over by the wave of technology that's coming and the
exactly.
uptake of it.
And if you
Um,
don't do it, someone else is going to do it. The only thing in terms of like existential threat that I could see is if these things were weaponized and you had like some completely autonomous battle drone system, for example, and
Skynet.
exactly Skynet, and it just decided that it was like going to switch sides for whatever
Yeah,
reason and wipe you out instead of the enemy. Okay.
yeah.
So that's a legitimate concern, but I'm, hopeful that whoever is designing these systems realizes that when you're designing a system to control real munitions,
Mm,
that you have to have a lot of really, it's like when you're flying an airplane, when you design an airplane, it better have a lot of very good safeguards built into it because otherwise you're going to have planes dropping out of the sky and no one's going to fly anymore.
oh, absolutely. I mean, just on that, I've got a lot of colleagues who are pilots, and they've been in the aviation industry for a long time, and some of these big A380s, the big jets, and certainly the
Yeah.
modern ones, they say that from a pilot's perspective, the actual human control of the plane on a flight is actually really small, because
Yes.
of all those systems. So the cybernetics, the stuff that's been used from a technology point of view, it's why airlines and air travel is one of the safest forms of travel.
Yeah. Absolutely. And
Yeah,
I mean, and that didn't happen by accident, by the
yeah.
way. That's because there was a decision, however it came about, to invest the money into making these systems as safe as they possibly could. I mean, you could have still had systems that were like, yeah, it goes up, it goes down. Usually there's not a problem. Occasionally
Mm,
something crashes. That's just life. And, that would have been a potential alternate scenario. But there was will out there to say, no, we rely on these systems too much. They're too integral to our
mm,
economy, to our way of life that we can't have every week a airplane crashing and have that just become part of the background.
yeah.
And I think it's gonna hopefully will be very much that way with large language models and their visual equivalents and all of these systems that we're going to say, look, we need to not, it's not just that we're economically dependent upon them and they're a critical part of our whole way of life,
Mm,
but we need to put in the money and invest the money and the time to making sure that they're as safe as our airplanes are,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
I hope that, you know, kind of ethos becomes standard.
Love it. So what we're saying is use all of this for good, not for evil.
Well, look, realistically, it's going to be used for evil. I
Yeah.
mean, we know that's just, the internet. I mean, I'd like to think that the internet is on base a public good, that it does get used for some really bad stuff. But on base, I think I would rather live in a world with the internet
Mm,
than without it.
yeah.
And although I'm sure AI will have all sorts of nefarious, uses, and it already does, I'd like to think that we can get to the point where on base, we're glad that we have it versus
Yeah.
not having
Yeah.
it, even though it's got its negative points.
It does. It does. So with that, it's been a great conversation so far. I want
Yeah,
to flip now and talk about business and
yeah, that'd be
whether
great.
you're in a
That's
sales team, whether you're a
yeah,
CEO, entrepreneur, founder of a startup. We can't ignore AI and the use of the technology to help us become more
right.
relevant to the marketplace, differentiate. I'd love your take on this because one of the things that I've seen a lot in certainly in the last couple of years around the selling teams that I work with is them giving too much emphasis to AI to
Yeah,
the point where the proposals they're doing, the responses to questions, even executive summaries are just obviously AI driven, AI
exactly.
utilized,
Yeah,
and they're missing or they're not checking it appropriately, or it's becoming almost dehumanized.
yeah,
So I'd love your take on this because I know you're doing work in this space and how we
yeah,
how we help sales teams and businesses
right.
maintain the human connection and the human voice.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question, and it's one, like as you said, I'm very, involved in. And I think that the concern is that everything just becomes very homogenized, that every proposal, every ad, everything you see on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, it looks, I mean, it's even true of the graphics now. So
Mm,
at least in my eye, when you see an AI generated graphic, of which there are so many now, they all have, one of three or four different very, very common styles. And I get it. I mean, it's much easier to just tell the AI, build me a picture of X, Y, or Z that's relevant to my article.
yeah.
I mean, I do. Than, going out or spending the time trying to find stock photographs or, whatever else
Mm,
you might do, hiring someone. So the problem is, how do you find AI systems that you can, because you're going to have to use them. I mean, there's no way around it. So,
yeah.
what kinds of AI systems are there out there that still allow you to have your own voice? And that's one thing I've worked on that is very important to me. And then, to back up for a second, I mean, the first sort of thing is to be educated about how these systems work, not in any deep sense, but it's kind of, to my mind, it's very similar to the GPS problem. I mean, use your common sense, right? I mean, there are people who, believe it or not, they'll just have AI write something, they won't check it, they'll
Mm,
just push it, and it'll either have some very obvious tells, or it'll just look weird, or it'll look not weird, but just
mm,
generic, unlike everything else out there. So, I mean, read through it and use it as a base and a starting point for what you want to say. Don't use
mm,
it as the final product, which may seem, to you and me very obvious, but there are a lot of people that still aren't really using AI in that fashion. They're just kind of using it as a, you press the button and we do the rest kind of
mm,
thing. So, but beyond that, I think that one thing that you're going to see a lot of in the future, and that I've been working along in quite a bit, is local language models. And what that means is, instead of using a huge model that's out in the cloud that you're paying money for on a regular basis, that is sending potentially your secret proprietary data out there, um, and who knows, where it's going to, or what. I mean, they're allowed to use
yeah.
that data for training.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's in the contract. These are systems instead, and I talk about this actually a lot in my newsletter, which is inside the blackbox.ai. I talk a lot about these local systems, and what these are basically, they reside on your computer. So it's a whole LLM, but it's on your machine. And you can have it on a high-end laptop. We're not
Okay.
talking about like a $200,000 supercomputer. And You can air gap it if you're really concerned about having security issues and leaks and things like that. And what you can do is you can give it examples of your actual ad copy, which is not something that you can really do in the same way with frontier models in the cloud, and have it learn your particular voice. And
Mhm.
I've actually written about this quite a bit, and it's very interesting because I've done that with comparing cloud-based frontier models to these local models that I've written up. And what was interesting is that the cloud-based stuff was very performative. So if you asked it to basically write something for a restaurant that had a kind of Southern theme and a Southern feel, it went way overboard and provided just ridiculous, almost cartoonish, it's like a caricature of what a Southern restaurant would be. If instead you gave it to the local model that I had written and that had just been trained on some examples of sort of Southern sounding ad copy,
Yeah.
it comes off as much more authentic.
Hmm.
And I think that's the big difference. And the other thing is that you can actually look at on your local models what's going on inside much more so. So what you're getting with these cloud models, these frontier models, ChatGPT and so forth, you give it an input and you get an output, and that's all you
Mm.
get. So you don't know
Yeah.
how it arrived at that. It's kind of back to the same problem again. It's like a black box.
Yeah.
And what you can do with local models is you can actually have systems that tell you how to tune it to be more like what it is that you're trying to get. And
Hmm.
I think that's going to be a lot of the future of both, creatives in marketing and things like that, but also other, areas as well, I'm sure. And it's going to happen pretty quickly because the hardware even now is very powerful. So, and the small large language models are very powerful as well. So I think you're going to see a bifurcation, certain sort of super big problems on the big cloud machines, and then something smaller like doing an ad campaign on
Mm.
Facebook would be on a smaller machine, your own laptop, a Mac with an, M series chip or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's my guess as to where a lot of this is going to be going in the next couple of years.
Because as you're talking, I'm thinking information and the access to information was I think the talk was every 20 years there's this massive uptake of information, but then from an AI perspective it started to get to every 5 weeks, but now it's something down to 5 days or whatever the case might be in terms of
Yeah,
its
I mean, I don't know the
regeneration.
exact numbers, but that
Yeah.
sounds quite reasonable to me.
Because what you're then saying is, because one of my big challenges that I keep thinking around AI is just that element of salespeople becoming quote unquote lazy, where
Yeah,
they give the AI all the instructions and don't question it, don't interrogate it, don't verify
exactly.
whether it sounds like them.
Exactly.
But if they've got a local large language, or as you described, a small large language model, which actually
Right.
sounds counterintuitive, a small large language model.
It's kind of like jumbo shrimp.
That's right. Good reference to Forrest Gump there. All
Yeah,
the different types of shrimp. But is it right then if I say this that will enable us to bring more of the human back into AI, so we're not as generic as we are now starting to sound.
I think so. I think so, absolutely. Because what you're doing is you're actually training it on your voice.
Mm.
That's why I call it your voice craft, because
Yeah.
it's able to sort of craft these ads and these campaigns using your own personal ad voice and not a generic AI ad voice that
Hmm.
has been used or learned by some cloud system. And so, if you've got, 20, 100 examples of campaigns that you have done that you can give it, my experience has been in running these that they learn very, very well how to produce output that sounds much more like what a real human being would do. And it's just really a question. I mean, it's not super mysterious. It's just that you're tuning it on your particular problem.
Mm.
And these cloud ChatGPT and so forth are general purpose machines.
Yeah.
So they're not tuned on your particular problem. They're designed to solve like all of the problems in the world. And sometimes they do a very, very impressive job of it. I mean, there's no question about it. But they don't have a mechanism in them that allows you to be private, allows you not. And, by the way, when you use a local model, of course, you don't pay costs for the, tokens,
Mm.
uh, because it's all on your machine. So nothing's going out there. You're not getting big bills for, using the system.
Yeah.
And, again, you're training it on your own personal material. And so I think that's going to be where you're going to see a lot of progress in the creative field. And I think it's going to come sooner rather than later because I think people are really, really hungry for using this. So that and, better training, I think, are going to be what brings us to that next level.
And when you say better training, Arshavir, is it better training on the use of this, or is it better training in just the knowledge of the the industry that you're working in? And what can you just talk a little bit more about the training
Yeah,
element?
of course. Sure. Well, what I'd like to see with the people who are actually my understanding of how a lot of these projects get, if you there was actually recently a Wall Street Journal article about how AI adoption is very poor and, when they try to put it in a company, people just don't like it. Well, if you dug into that article a little bit, you would find that one of the things that was a big red flag was that they weren't integrating these uh, kinds of new systems into the existing workflow. It was just kind of this extra thing over to the side that they were bolting on, and people really just didn't know how to use what was bolted on with the rest of the stuff.
Mm,
So I think that along with better workflow integration, which I think is key, you need better training.
mm,
And I suspect that what's going on in a lot of places is people are just being given these bolted on AI tools. They're being given very, very minimal understanding of how to use them. They play around with them maybe a little bit on their own, but a lot of people, it's just a job. And if they don't have to do anything extra, they're not going to, and that's fine.
yeah. Yeah.
So by training, I think I mainly mean giving people much better understanding and insight of how to use these systems, how to create a prompt, how to train a system if it's a local system. Just basically getting them really super familiar. I mean, I use these systems, constantly every day.
Yeah.
And just in interacting with them, I've learned so much about uh, just sort of subtleties about how you phrase things, how you don't phrase things, the kinds of things that they're strong on, the kinds of things that they're weak on. And of course, you got to remember they're getting better every day.
Yeah.
So things that they were weak on a week ago or 2 weeks ago, they may be much stronger on now.
Yeah.
But to get back to the original question, I'd say training of your users has to be, from what I've seen in the corporate domain, has to be much more thorough in most of these places than what we're probably seeing right now.
Yeah, yeah, I like that because I can see these smaller large language model systems being used not just within a sales team, but maybe within an organization. So an organization
Yeah,
will have their own large language model that's ring fenced, if you like, for them, so that all the sales
exactly.
team, for example, are expected to have have the language. So we've got a common message that goes out to the marketplace, but
Exactly.
without sounding like each salesperson, for example, is a clone. So there's an
Right.
individual. So can you talk a
Yes.
little bit about maybe the individuality and the benefit of having a smaller large language model that's local, how you can build that? Because I'm thinking, and this is just me thinking up the top of my head, that if I had
Yeah.
an organization, I could have one of these that is not on the cloud, but within that, I could have individuals within the team could also have
Right.
components of it so that
Right.
it's learning what's different about you. And you and I are in the same sales team, but we have a different
Right.
approach. So it's starting to
Right.
learn what that different approach is. So we are more human when we're talking to customers.
Right. Well, one thing is that the system I've developed, and this is not specific to this system, any kind of small language model, small large language model, I guess we'll call it, it can do this, is it can have multiple voices.
Mm.
So it's designed so that you can train it on voice A, and you can, that can be a particular brand voice that you've worked with for quite a while. It can be a particular creative team's voice. It can be anything. So what you can do is there's actually in the app, there's actually a pull down on the top right, and it lets you choose amongst different voices. So you're not stuck with just using one
Okay.
voice that you've trained it on. And
Yeah.
then, so for the training, it's actually really straightforward. You just take a whole bunch of samples of the copy that you want to train it on to give it that voice.
Yeah.
And on, let's say an M series Mac, it takes maybe an hour or two. And this is just a one-time thing.
Mm.
So this is just during setup. And then you just take the results of that and plug that into the SLM and SLLM and dropped an L there. Uh, and you're good to go. And what you could do, I kind of like the idea that you're bringing up. I mean, what you could do is you could have all of this on a VPN, so everything is safe within the community of, your particular organization.
Mm.
So you don't have to worry about secure, confidential information going out. And then, you can have, as you say, sort of like concentric rings of different people that use different ones of these models, but you know
Mm.
that the whole thing is still safely behind a VPN, so no one's accidentally uh, sending out to ChatGPT some companies, financial projections for the next year or
Yeah.
something, god awful like that.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunately, I've actually done a little research on this. That's unfortunately, those kinds of information breaches are really common. I mean, I'm sure you remember this was kind of like the worst case scenario, but what happened with Sony a few years back, where they were just completely dead in the water because of an attack. And that, I think went on for quite a while, maybe months
Mm.
even. So the security component of it, I think, you're right about, in terms of having it in-house and having these sort of concentric rings of security and so forth. I think uh, is really, really going to be key.
And with that, I mean, customers and buyers, potential buyers, are getting more and more savvy, and they know that the people talking to them from any selling organization will be using AI in
Right.
some way, shape, or form, to the point where for many buyers it sounds almost the same. And I cite an example that I saw on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago that talked about a chief sales officer or something from an organization had, I think she was saying she had 23 outreached LinkedIn messages that came from prospective suppliers.
Yeah.
And each of them, and she said each of them were personalized, each of them had good information, but it was obvious that each of them had used an AI platform to actually do
Right.
that. And
Right.
she said, even though there were slight differences, they all looked the same to her.
Yeah.
And so the 24th person was the person that did something really radical, something we would have done probably back in even the 90s, is they picked up the telephone and called her. And she took the call and had the conversation, and that's where they've started to now. I don't know what the outcome was, but it was an interesting output there for me, because it was saying, okay, we use all this technology to try to have speed to market, cost to serve gets reduced, and et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the
Right.
day, what do we want to do? We want to have a human interaction. So what
Exactly.
I'm thinking is what you're building is I guess the next frontier, for want of a better term, where you can maintain that human interaction because it's localized.
I think so. I think that will help a great deal in making the interaction more particular to your brand and not
Mm.
as generic as you say. Now, I mean, the thing, your story makes me think that we're still in very early days in terms of people really understanding how to use this technology.
Mm.
And I'm sure that probably what happened was 23 people, told their chat GPT or whatever they were using to write this note, and they made a few minor changes to it without really realizing that everybody else using chat GPT was going to get pretty much the same note, and whatever they sent was going to be a minor variation of that note, and that was
Yeah.
the tell. And I think my guess would be the tell was probably, if you had just read one of those, you probably would have been okay with it.
Mm,
Um, but it's the fact that so many of them sound so much alike that starts to give this stuff away. I mean, what's interesting is even though people talk about how easy it is to tell that something is written by an AI. A lot
mm,
of the AI detectors out there are actually very, very poor. So for example, I mean, and you can look this up, I forget where I read this, but like they fed in like the Declaration of Independence and some of Lincoln's speeches, I think. And
yeah.
all of those, it came back as being written by AI. So uh, so the founding fathers were smarter than we give them credit for because apparently they were using AI,
Way
in the
back then.
18th century. And so I think that the AI output, there are times when it's obviously AI. If you
Mm,
get something that's super, super, 12 pages of incredibly well formatted and detailed stuff,
mm,
that's a pretty obvious tell for most of us, I think.
yeah.
But I think that in terms of what you're talking about, which is, I assume, we're relatively short form, a lot of the tell there is that all of those things sound so similar to each other.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and that's kind of what I'm getting at with the, local models is that if you tune them and train them on your own material, you're not going to have as much of the problem as you're having. And then again, this also does go back to training. So, I mean, I think that as people become more aware that you can't just have it write something and then change a few words here and there and send it off. And I mean, I've seen examples of that too. I think where there was a case in a university where people were caught using ChatGPT to write essays, and
Yeah.
they were told to write an apology, and all of the apologies essentially sounded exactly identical. Um, because they'd written the apology, of course, ironically, in ChatGPT using ChatGPT.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to say it's a panacea. I'm not going to say every single time you use it, it's going to turn out better. But I think local models are going to be the key to allowing us to get more of our own personal voice back
Mm,
into creatives.
love that. Love that.
Yeah.
So, Arshavir, it'd be remiss of me not to ask, given that you've been in the industry for 40 odd years, and you've seen a lot of technology changes and uptakes and the speed of adoption and stuff like that. Um, Without asking you, what does the future look like from an AI perspective, and
Right,
particularly in business, where we've been talking about the small large language models and the localization?
right.
Where do you see this technology going? And do you have any, I guess, concerns over the next 4 or 5 years that we should be aware of, or is it a case of we need to learn how to leverage this more ethically and more effectively?
I think it's more the latter. We need to learn how to leverage it. I think AI is not going anywhere. It's like the internet. The internet came along and it's now a critical component of our lives, so much so that, we can't even imagine living without it. We have
Mm,
machines in our pockets that are constantly connected to it. We use GPS, we use email. I mean, it's just impossible to imagine modern life without the internet. And
mm,
it's getting to be that way with AI even now, and it's going to be that way more so. So I think we have to learn how to live with it. And I think it's a remarkably powerful technology that's going to have, on the whole, a positive effect on our
yeah.
lives. I think one thing we're going to see is as machines get more powerful and as algorithms get more powerful, we're going to see more of these small, large language models when you don't need the expense and power of a huge
Hmm.
model that can do everything when you're just trying to do one small thing.
Yeah.
Uh, and a lot of those models are going to be open source, which means, that you can just download them for yourself. And then, it'll kind of be like something like operating system, like Linux operating systems, where
Okay.
a lot of that stuff is open source, but then you have a company that kind of makes it safe for the average user. So what you're paying
Yeah.
for is not the open source code per se, but all of the infrastructure around it to help you use it. So
Yeah.
something like Red Hat, Linux. And so that's going to be a big one. I think you're going to see the power of what these things can do increase exponentially, and I think very quickly. One problem is they're very, very siloed right
Yeah.
now.
Okay.
It's not so if you're working in one window and you want to refer to something that you did in another window, there's not an easy way to do it. You can kind of there are workarounds for it, of course, but if you're talking to it about your grocery list in one window and something about your schedule in another window, there's no way that you can get the grocery list window to say, "Oh, by the way, you have this appointment tomorrow, so you can't go shopping then." So I
Yeah.
think
Okay.
that, and I know I've heard people like at OpenAI talk about how there's going to be much more cross silo integration in the future.
Mm.
Um, Sort of, this is kind of a small one, but I think they're going to have right now, they don't work very well with time, which is very important for a lot of the uses. So if, they don't always have, I'll have it say like good night to me when it's the middle of the day or something like that. Or think it's like March 25th when it's March 23rd. Just
Yeah.
little weird things like that. And I think
Yeah.
that's going to have to be something that's fixed sooner rather than later because people are using these for scheduling. They're using them for,
Yeah.
doctor's appointments. And so it can't think that it's the middle of the night if you're telling it, I'm going to the doctor now and it's at 11 a.m. or something like that.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and in general, I think we're just going to see more acceptance of them, more integration of them into our daily life. It's
Mm.
still very early. I
Mm.
mean, I live in a kind of bubble of people that use this stuff constantly. But when I talk to my friends and family that are kind of outside of this bubble, I realize that the vast majority of people out there are still very much not in touch with how these systems can work and what they can do. And
Yeah.
if they are using them, they're using them for, basically extremely simple applications that are nowhere near what their capabilities are. So that's a social difference, I think. That's not a
Yeah.
technological difference, but I think we're going to see that kind of, at one time the internet was this exotic thing and people heard about it, but most people it really didn't impact their lives that much, except maybe for email. And
Yeah.
now, like I said, you got this machine in your pocket, and without the internet, it wouldn't be particularly useful.
Yeah.
So I think I forget who said this, but these systems right now are the worst that they are ever going to be. And you are just seeing, and I've seen this in my own work in the past, just in even over the course of a few weeks or months, they improve enormously. And that improvement is just going to become exponentially greater as we
Yeah.
move forward. And I guess the my other thing is maybe I don't know regulation. I don't want to see too much regulation about these. I'd
Mm.
like to see self-regulation. And I think some of these companies are aware that if they don't sort of regulate themselves, that they'll be regulated externally. And I think often that can be a very good model because it means they're relatively free to do what they want to do, but there's also kind of an outer guardrail that
Yeah.
protects them, that protects us from them if they really get out of control. So just, who knows how accurate I am in my guesses. But that would be my answer to you.
No, I love that, and I think from a person that's been deeply involved in this, as you said before, you might be in yourself described bubble, but you're working with this every single day, so you're probably
Yeah.
one of the most qualified to make that prediction. So I
Yeah, that
think
may be.
and I just say to people, hey, just embrace
Yeah.
it, but don't give in to it, and always question it because you've got to maintain your own voice. Because at the end of the day,
Yes.
particularly in sales, is you want to be memorable to your customers. You don't want to sound like everybody else because then if you do that, you lose your individual differentiation.
Exactly. And
Yeah,
that's what your voice craft is all about.
love
So
it,
we're
love it.
we're completely in accord in that.
So with that, Arshavir, it's been a great conversation and
Yeah,
greatly
I've really
appreciate you
enjoyed it.
coming on. For people who have listened in and like to know more about you and connect with you, but also you mentioned a newsletter before, inside the
In,
blackbox.ai, is
yep,
that correct?
that's on a Substack and it's inside the blackbox.ai. And then the app which I'm working on is yourvoicecraft.ai.
Cool. Are there any other places where people can learn more about you or connect with you, or are they the best places?
Well, I have a website, Arvoinen, ARVOINEN.ai, that I have sort of more general stuff on there. But I think, a good starting point is the Substack newsletter because I produce religiously every Monday. And
Okay,
we're doing a lot of interesting stuff there. I have a couple collaborators and we're doing some cool experiments and, thought pieces and things like that.
brilliant, brilliant. Excellent. Well, I'll put all that in the show notes. And
Great.
once again, thank you so much for being a guest on the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast. I trust the information in this episode has been helpful in your journey towards becoming exceptional. And remember, please take the time to rate the show, subscribe to the show so other people can find it. But also, if I can help you, jump on my calendar, go to leadwithdarren.com and let's have a conversation about how I can help you along your journey to being exceptional.